Are you a be careful parent? Be careful, be careful, be careful. Or are you a have fun parent? And so I've just asked this question repeatedly to my couples, particularly those who have kids, and it was clear that the be careful parents were the ones more likely to have sexual issues in their relationship.
Welcome to the Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast for couples therapists, marriage counselors, and relationship coaches to explore the practice of couples therapy. And now, your host, Shane Birkel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. I'm Shane Birkel. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here to bring you the most up-to-date information on how to help people have a better relationship. So whether you're a therapist who's looking to learn more about working with couples or a person who just wants to have better relationships, I'm hoping that this information will be valuable for you. I try to bring on many of the leaders in the world of couples therapy for interviews. So if you're interested in this, definitely subscribe and like the episode. I'd be really, really grateful for that. And if you're interested in the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, there's more information about that in the show notes, and you can click the link to find out more. So thank you so much. Please click subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the show. Everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is Shane Birkel, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Tom Murray, sex and relationship therapist and author of the book, Making Nice with Naughty, an intimacy guide for the rule-following, organized, perfectionist, practical, and color within the line types. Hey, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Yeah, I think it's really important for therapists to get training in, sex therapy or things about sex. And so it's always good to have these episodes once in a while where we have somebody who's an expert in that. So appreciate you coming on. But why don't you start by telling everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Well, again, it just is a delight to be here. I have a group practice in North Carolina that's really a niche practice focused almost exclusively on sex and couples therapy, and have licenses in other states, including Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And so I spread my tentacles out to those different places. Prior to becoming a sex therapist, I was a university counseling center director and did that for about 11 years, and then transitioned into private practice in 2017 and have been doing that and adjuncting at Northwestern or Adler, different institutions teaching sex therapy and couples therapy.
That's great. And what inspired you to write the book, Making Nice with Naughty?
Oh man, it was well. First, I had the title long before I had the book in mind. Making nice with naughty. It just really had a resonance for me,
Yeah, it's a
and
great title.
yeah, and I was working with a couple. And it was during this period that I was also learning about radically open dialectical behavior therapy, RODBT. And I was working with a couple in 2020, doing telehealth like many of us. And I had this light bulb moment that I bet I could predict the quality of this couple's sex life by just asking one question. And I'm like 10 minutes into the session, my first session with them. And I asked them, are you a be careful parent? Be careful, be careful, be careful. Or are you a have fun parent? And so I just asked this question repeatedly to my couples, particularly those who have kids. And it was clear that the be careful parents were the ones more likely to have sexual issues in their relationship. And be careful, that kind of tendency to be very risk averse and threat sensitive is characteristic of that over controlled temperament, which is the basis of my book, is exploring how that particular temperament influences our sexual and intimate relationships.
Hmm. And say more about why that, like, what made you come to that conclusion that that would be the case?
Well, sex is about play. Sex is
Hmm.
about having fun, and it's about an orgasm by definition is really the loss of control. And so if someone is particularly risk averse, threat sensitive, rejection sensitive, if they have a very strong opinion about how the world should be, must be, and has to be, and they get really tense when the world doesn't comport to these expectations, you can imagine how that rigidity really can impact one's ability to let go
Hmm.
and have a good time in the bedroom.
So these are things from the subtitle of the book that people who might be organized or perfectionistic or practical or color within the lines, those are people who are more likely to be sort of, to want control, to have a hard time just sort of relaxing into the play or something like that.
That's exactly right. So even if it's like I have to have an erection every time I want to have sex, right?
Hmm.
And then the person starts to anticipate, particularly if they've had an inability to get an erection when they want, then they start to anticipate they're not going to get an erection in the future, and of course that releases adrenaline, and adrenaline deflates the erections.
Hmm.
So this very rigid view of what sex has to look like becomes then an impediment to the ability to have fun.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And let's say it's called perfect, just to use a one word, like perfectionism or something like that.
Yeah.
It's sort of like they make up this story in their head that it has to be perfect, that I have to perform a certain way. And then it feels very well, one, it would be very anxiety provoking going into the
Mm,
situation. And two, it
mm.
would be very you would start, your beliefs would start reinforcing themselves, once you're not getting an erection fast enough or things aren't happening the way you were hoping that they would. Then it starts being like, oh, see, that this is, I knew I wouldn't be able to do it, and all of that kind of stuff.
That's
Negative
right.
self-talk.
And that's one type of sexual perfectionism. In the book, there I talk about four different types. So the first
Hmm.
one is I have to be sexually perfect. So that's really what you were just describing. The second one is my partner has to be sexually perfect, right? So there might be an expectation. My partner has to have an orgasm, otherwise I'm inadequate, right? The third one is I think my partner thinks I have to be sexually perfect, right? So if I have this belief that my partner is judging me for not getting an erection or for not having an orgasm or for not getting adequately lubricated, whatever it is, I might I start becoming anxious. And then the fourth type of sexual perfectionism is society expects me to be sexually perfect. I have to have the right size waist, the right size breast. My labia can't be too long. My penis can't be too short, whatever it is. It's like there are societal messages that can impede people's ability to have a good time as well.
So if you have clients who are describing some of these issues, any of these issues, what are some of the ways in which you can help them? And what, for therapists out there, what are some of the things that they can begin to do to help them? I guess it'd be more flexible or be more relaxed, things like that.
Yes, so that's exactly right. So in my book, I really integrate um, very familiar theoretical approaches that a lot of your listeners will be familiar with. So RODBT being the primary frame for understanding these sexual issues. In RODBT, as many listeners are going to be familiar with the classic dialectical behavior therapy,
Mhm.
Marshall Linehan, and uh, that approach is really suited for people who are under controlled. So the classic borderline personality disorder, for example. what Thomas Lynch, the originator of RODBT, found is that when very over-controlled people were put into DBT groups, such as people with anorexia, they were they were they were they took on too many rules, right? So a lot of DBT is about emotional containment, right? And so, but people who are over controlled are already experts at managing their emotions, you see. And so the idea was in RODBT, it's how to turn down the volume on the over controlledness. So, like you said, to become more psychologically flexible. And so using RODBT techniques, but as in addition to, I use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, RABT, rational emotive behavior therapy, and a lesser known approach, although not a classic psychotherapy, is the work of Byron Katie, which I find to be incredibly helpful to help people to really question their own mind chatter. Because a lot of times when you're in that kind of perfectionist mode, you'll believe everything your mind produces, right? And that kind of fuels that perfectionist attitude, right? I have to have an erection, right? Otherwise, I'm going to be judged. Otherwise, I'm going to be embarrassed and whatever. And that my value as a human being is dependent on what someone else thinks about me. And learning how to question that is also essential.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if when you see people coming to you for help, is it often one partner who is experiencing these things, or is it both partners? And I'm curious if it's one, what is the other partner's perspective or stance oftentimes?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Usually, there's a saying, birds of a feather flock together. So it's more likely that over-controlled people are going to be with someone who's also over-controlled. But think about over-controlled, like all temperaments are on a continuum, right? So someone can be more over-controlled than someone else. It's kind of parenthetically, a lot of times the more over-controlled person thinks the lesser over-controlled person is actually under-controlled, but when in fact they're just not as over-controlled. And so in those examples, I might have a couple where I'm thinking of one now. Has difficulty maintaining an erection, and he experiences rapid ejaculation, and that is a part of his over-controlled temperament. But he also is married to a person who has a lot of judgments about their partner not being able to maintain an erection, and kind of this rigid, narrowly defined rule around what sex has to look like. So they can have different types of rules, but they're both a part of a over-controlled temperament manifestation.
I see. So take me through, just to stick with that example, that might be something you've seen several times, I'm sure. So just a sort of generalized example of, how do you begin to work with a couple like that, where that the one partner is experiencing the premature ejaculation, the other partner is critical about that. I mean, how do you begin to sort of start off with them and move through the process with them?
Yeah. Perhaps unpopular among many of our colleagues, I am certainly someone who's willing to see my couples individually.
Mm-hmm.
And in that context, in this particular context, I was inclined to see them individually in addition to together. And the reason that I do that is because over-controlled people can also experience what's called demand resistance, which is whenever they feel like someone is making a demand of them, they can really kind of dig in their heels. And that is particularly true when their partner is present, right? So if I'm giving kind of direct feedback to one partner that says, I'm going to encourage you to look at this a different way, or even challenge them, I call it carefrontational. If I can challenge them to think about, well, how is that working for you to have this kind of rigid rule? This particular client I'm thinking of, they said, uh, you know, I just can't get over it, right? Even though it's been 10 years, I just can't get over this sexual issue. And to me, that was very interesting because 10 years is a long time not to get over something, right? So it implied to me that there was something else happening, right? That there was this rigidity around what sex has to look like versus having some psychological flexibility. So speaking to that person individually, I'm able to uh, uh, invite them to be thinking about how a more flexible outlook gets them a little bit more of what they want, even if it's not all of what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the context of having both of them together, there's a greater likelihood of coming to experience that demand resistance.
Mm-hmm. Good. So you start maybe with individual sessions and you try to understand their beliefs, try to sort of ask them questions that would lead to more flexibility or a different understanding of what's happening. And
I,
then, yeah, go ahead.
to clarify, I start seeing them together.
Mm-hmm.
And then if during my work with them, if I'm assessing there's a value of seeing them separately, that's when I go have them go into separate sessions. That example that I gave was a rather a unique one. Generally speaking, what I'm interested in is listening to what their values are around a sexual and intimate relationship with each other, and how much of an overlap is there around those values, and kind of in that act way, what would be the behaviors that would be consistent with living out those values?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and say more about that as far as, do each person has their own set of values typically, and you just try to paint a picture for them of what this could look like, going forward when they're leaving your office and trying to define what success could look like and try to encourage them to, redefine that in some ways.
Right, right. You had mentioned, I think, offline Tammy Nelson, and she a sex therapist, talks about sexual scripts and having a sense of what what is the client's sexual script? What does sex look like? What does enjoyable, pleasurable sex look like to them? And then what is the meaning that's being assigned to them? What about that's so important to them?
Mhm.
And then uh, uh, helping the clients identify, well, what behaviors would be what behaviors would they be doing that would express the expressions of those values, and then incorporating them into their daily life. So, for example, a lot of clients think, foreplay is the stuff that you do immediately before sex, right? Uh, I think of foreplay as the behaviors that you do after sex that build up the sexual tension, right? Well, how are you relating to each other between sexual episodes so that the person is more interested in having sex with you, right? And uh, so it's less of this kind of mechanical, back in the 60s and 70s, sex therapy was really about mechanics. And now we're recognizing that it's much more uh, 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 complex than that, and thinking what is happening outside of the bedroom that makes having sex in the bedroom more enjoyable.
And what are some examples of those things in day-to-day life that could, be foreplay or build the tension?
Yeah, I think of just simply demonstrating kindness,
Mhm. Nice.
consideration, collaboration, coordination. Those are the four things that I really have my couples reflect on: kindness, consideration, collaboration, coordination. Um, a lot of our colleagues will emphasize sacrifice and compromise, right? That relationshiping is about sacrifice and compromise. And to me, that really seems antithetical because that implies that you're on separate teams, sacrifice and compromise. But if you're on the same team, it's really about collaboration, coordination, consideration. And so knowing what does your partner need in order to feel sexually interested? What does your partner need in order to feel sexually interesting? Right? Those are having those kinds of conversations between sexual episodes are really vitally important. And I'll mention that this is particularly true in the context of monogamous relationships. There's some data, for example, that says that for every year a monogamous couple is together, their liking each other declines 4% per year, and that their lusting of each other declines 8% per year. Right. So there's a natural degrading, if you will, of this liking and lusting after your partner, particularly in the context of monogamy. And so if that's an occupational hazard of monogamy, then it becomes really imperative people who want to preserve monogamy to think about, oh, how we have to do a lot more to preserve it because we don't have the benefit of competition, right? Competition helps to drive your interest in something,
Hmm.
right? Think of if you've ever um, bid on something on eBay, right? When you know someone else is bidding against you, you end up spending more for that thing than you would otherwise if no one was bidding, right? Well, if in non-monogamous relationships, if you see your partner being that other people are interested in your partner, it makes your partner more interesting, right?
Hmm.
So but there's obviously that has its own sets of pros and cons. So in monogamy, one of the cons that we don't talk about much is this idea of uh, how liking and lusting after your partner can decline over time when there's not this intentionality given to it.
That's really interesting. That's really important for people to think about. And I was thinking of the analogy of sort of, you know, the first few months of dating someone, there's very much feeling of like, either partner could decide at any time that they don't want to continue going with this, right? It's early on, so I have either unconsciously or consciously, I have a strong motivation to show up in a certain way to make sure that I'm impressing this person if I want to keep them in my life.
That's exactly right. And I think about men, the very first place that a lot of men go after a breakup is the gym,
Right, right.
right? But they haven't gone to the gym in years since when they were in that prior relationship, and they got comfortable in that relationship. They stopped investing in themselves. But when the relationship ends, they think, "Oh, I have to do stuff to make myself appear more attractive to a potential mate." Right? Is going to the gym the only way to do that? No, but that is how a lot of men think, right? And so that idea of, oh, what I shouldn't just assume my partner will want to have sex with me. I have to be asking myself, well, what is that? What is it about me that's so appealing,
Hmm.
right? And that maybe there's just to say it differently, low sexual desire. There's often a desire discrepancy. One person is more interested in than another. Well, it may be that with the low desire person, it isn't that there's something wrong with them. It may be that they have good judgment, according to Peggy Kleinplatz, right? That oh, the person who wants to have sex is just not all that interesting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And why does someone want just to eat a bowl of steamed broccoli without anything interesting added to it?
Right. Right. The other thing when you were talking about kindness and consideration and those four things, I was thinking about the emotional connection, right? And that could be part of what brings flavor to the
Mm,
dish as well, to the broccoli. But the I feel like there are a lot of therapists who are not sex therapists who are sort of like, hey, if you fix the emotional connection, the sex will just fall into place, you know? And I've talked to sex therapists who have said, if you fix the sexual stuff, then the emotional connection will fall into place. And I feel like maybe both of those are oversimplifications of the
for
reality.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. What I like to do is look at exceptions. There are a lot of people with terrible communication patterns who have great sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of, oh, we have to work on the communication. No. In fact, to say it differently, I've come to conclude that there are essentially two forces impacting on relationships. One is closeness and one is intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So closeness is the things that are the pursuit of low risk, low anxiety, high predictability, comfort, familiarity, right? That's closeness, low risk, low anxiety, high predictability, comfort, familiarity. And for over-controlled people in particular, that's like what you've been told your whole life you should pursue, right? Intimacy, on the other hand, going back to your example earlier, those first few months of a new relationship, is about high risk, high anxiety, low predictability, newness, novelty. And that's the basis of eroticism. You need to have mystery to have to tap into the erotic, right? And so when new relationships start, it's all intimacy. It's all intimacy, all mystery, um, and that can be very exciting, but it burns incredibly hot. It's not something that you can easily maintain for a long period of time. And so if you're looking to have a long-term relationship with someone, closeness has to come in to the picture to kind of cool down that intimacy, right? But when that closeness is left unchecked, when that closeness is privileged over intimacy, that couple begins to convince themselves of things like, oh, I don't even need to ask the question. I already know what they're going to say. Right. So, in other words, they stop having a relationship with their partner and instead have a relationship with their thoughts about their partner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's closeness. And that's what I see, and I'm sure many of your listeners will see, is that when couples come in, it very well may be that they are too close. Not close enough, but that they are too close and have very little intimacy, very little curiosity about each other. And that takes effort to reignite curiosity. It's the understanding that you can never know your partner, right? You can never know them, no matter how long you try, how hard you try. You can never know them. The most you can know are your thoughts about them.
And when you talk about, can you talk about, I know that you talk about vulnerability in your book. Can you talk about the difference between when you're talking about closeness, how is that different from what vulnerability would look like? Because I feel like you're talking about different things.
Yes. So vulnerability is much more is much more associated with intimacy than closeness. Vulnerability in order for something to be vulnerable, in my opinion, it must include an element of I need help, right? I need you. I need help. And for over-controlled people in particular, vulnerability is very scary, right? Because vulnerability brings uncertainty, and that is the greatest fear of a lot of over-controlled people is uncertainty. They want to have they want to have a sense of what is going to happen next, right? What are we going to do next? And that becomes the impediment for people who are over controlled is they shy away from vulnerability. So instead of just saying, I'm nervous that I'm not going to get an erection, what they do instead is they avoid physical contact with their partner so as to not increase the demand that their partner might show of wanting to have physical intimacy. So they pull away, right? Versus slaying the dragon. I use that metaphor in the book, which is to lean into vulnerability, or I use the word, I talk about awkwardness. Like a lot of over-controlled people have an allergic reaction to awkwardness. And yet, if they were able to lean into the awkward, then they know I am moving closer to intimacy. I'm moving closer to vulnerability. So to embrace that as a mile marker of success, I'm going to allow myself to be more awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, Shane, but when I had sex for the first time, it was incredibly awkward.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And it didn't stop me from having sex the second time. So this idea that awkward is somehow bad, I try to remind them that there have been many times in their life where awkward was present and they still move forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost the opposite of being controlled, being perfectionistic, and I think that's such a message in our society or in particular families that we have to show this perfectionistic view to the world. Like things have to look
Yes.
perfect, you have to get good grades, you have to perform well in the world, and we take that into our personal lives. And I think, you know especially for people where that's a strong theme, it makes
Mhm.
sense that they would struggle with that, with what you're talking about, that it's like letting go of control,
Mhm.
moving into vulnerability, saying that you're not perfect, you don't have everything together. And it makes sense. Like that's really the intimacy of showing up authentically with your partner, because that's the real you. The real you is not the mask that we show to the world that looks more perfect than we are. The real
That's
us
right.
is very vulnerable.
That's right. And of course, uh, it's important as I'm going to make a guess. I shouldn't, but I'm going to make a guess that you identify as a cisgender male,
Mhm.
right? And it's important to talk about how women experience a lot of this very differently, right?
Mhm.
Where I think there's a societal message, for example, that women have to be perfect at all domains of life. They have to be a perfect wife, a perfect mother, a perfect employee, a perfect daughter. And where a lot of men, we just have to be great at our careers, right? That's the overall impression. Um, and and one of those being perfect is being a perfect lover. I think there's an element of that women face that men don't face. And I know I'm using very binary language. So what to dive a little deeper in that, there are essentially three types of desire, and the most frequently discussed one is called spontaneous desire. It's this idea that, oh, I can just have sex at any given moment. I don't need a lot of preparation. I just want to have sex. That kind of desire is most associated with male desire, right? But because that's the type of desire we see in movies and in porn, right? in erotic novels, the assumption is that women should also have spontaneous desire. And if they don't have spontaneous desire, there's something wrong with them. And that is a very common theme I see in my consulting practice, is that why wouldn't my wife want to have sex with me? If sex is fun, why wouldn't she want to just, hop on this and have a good time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because most women don't have spontaneous desire. Most women have either responsive or more likely contextual desire, which is this sense of I can be turned on, but it's really a matter of brakes and accelerators, right? So there are contexts that may slam on the brakes to desire, or that there are contexts that make sex more interesting to pursue. So for a lot of women, they don't have a want, right? They don't have this sense of I want to have sex, where men who more typically have spontaneous desire have this sense of I want, you see. And so they can then think negatively about them, or their partners can think negatively about them for not having that sense of want. And a large part of my job as a sex therapist is really psychoeducational,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is explaining kind of that no matter what your desire type is, that is the right and perfect desire type for you. And that once you understand it, then your partner who may have spontaneous desire doesn't take it personally, but sees it as an opportunity to think about, what do I need to do to help my partner get their foot off the brake? Or what can I do that helps my partner put their foot on the accelerator? And likewise, the person with contextual desire thinks about the same thing. How can I set a context for sex? Because sex is important to our relationship, and I want to be a sexual person. So that it just provokes a different set of questions that hopefully will move them in the direction that they ultimately want to go.
Yeah, and I feel like, it's important to talk about these male-female dynamics in the binary, and it's important to recognize that doesn't exist in every relationship and every individual, but that, because of the way that we're socialized, we often fall into these things without even being conscious of it. And I
Absolutely.
think what you're talking about is almost deconstructing this so that we aren't just coming from a blind sense of, like the assumption of, why doesn't my partner just want to enjoy this experience with me? There's probably a lot of good reasons, either for them personally or because of societal things or whatever. And I think it helps us move into compassion and understanding for both people on both sides to understand each other better.
Yes, yes. A common question I'll ask my clients is, when is the last time you read a book, a nonfiction book, about sex and sexuality? Do you know what the most common answer is?
Never.
Never. Never. And yet people will spend thousands of dollars on their physical development, their spiritual development, their professional development, and yet nothing is given to their sexual development. And we are sexual beings 24/7. We were sexual beings in utero. And who we are in our late teens is going to be different sexually than who we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and hopefully beyond. And so it becomes imperative for us to be educating ourselves about the sex and sexuality relative to our place in our developmental life cycle. Not only our own, but particularly if you're in a heterosexual relationship, is to also be educating yourself about the sexual needs, interests, desires, the sexual functioning of people who aren't your gender, right? If you're going to be having sex with other people who may be different from you, trying to understand that helps you then to ask better questions um,
Mhm.
later on. Sometimes I share this story as a sex therapist. When I became a sex therapist, uh, I have been asked by women, or been comment. Women have commented to me in kind of these social situations. I bet you really know how to eat pussy, and I've been kind of surprised by that comment. Right?
Right.
They just assume that as a sex therapist, and I say, I have come. I'm almost now anticipating this. I say, while it's true that I know a lot about eating pussy, I know nothing about eating yours. Right?
Right.
And that's the point that I'm trying to drive home is that there's even if you have all of this information, right? You still have to have a unique relationship with this particular person and to be exploratory in that kind of way. This whole idea of I shouldn't have to ask for it, my partner should already know, is setting yourself up for disappointment.
Mhm.
But it also is another manifestation of that over-controlled temperament, that kind of rule orientation of I believe that my partner should already know everything that I need as a sexual person, and 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 what is that in the service of? It's in the service of not having to be vulnerable and asking for it,
Mhm.
right? Of actually saying, more pressure, less pressure, faster, slower. I don't. If I don't put myself out there, of course, there are partners who, when given feedback, have this what in RODBT is called a "don't hurt me" response, where they start sulking or pulling away because they've gotten some feedback. Um, that certainly is unhelpful too. But this, to reiterate, it's like educating yourself about your own sex and sexuality, and educating yourself about your partners so that you're better equipped to ask important questions.
Yeah, and it seems like the consideration comes into it so much, right? And so, like you said, on the one hand, read the books, get the education. Most people don't even start with that,
That's right.
but also be considerate and humble enough to realize that each individual is very different, and that the best thing that I can do is move into curiosity about what might work for my partner or what doesn't work for my partner. Very important.
That's right.
And
Yes.
and have enough of the, well, I call it self-esteem, whatever you would call it, to be vulnerable, to be able to open up and have a voice and share about my own reality as well.
Yes, yes. I'm thinking of a couple that I saw a couple weeks ago, very educated folks. Um, and the husband couldn't understand why his wife needed a time to work up towards sex.
Mhm.
And part of her complaint was that penetrative sex was painful initially, um, but that she realized, oh, if given enough time, my body can receive my partner and it's not painful. Well, he just thinks I have an erection. I should be able to. He had this kind of erection sleeve mentality, and it's just, I just stick a penis in there, and that's all that matters, right? Like, uh, to me, that's just mind-boggling that assumption is there, but that is, dare I say, the cost of a society that doesn't really privilege sex education, that
Mhm.
keeps people uh, uh, still thinking that sex is really mechanics and all you need to know is insert penis in vagina, and that's all that there is to it. But it's there's so much more, and uh, context even becomes more important, I think, as we age.
Mhm. What do you mean by that, really quick?
our bodies change. We may develop disabilities. We may be on medications, for example, that decrease lubrication, or particularly with psychiatric medications, there are often sexual side effects that, if unknown, people can take really personally. You're not interested. You don't have any interest in me anymore. When in fact, they just may have a lower libido because of the medications that they're on,
Mm.
or a lot of particularly women who've had mastectomies, their breasts have been removed, and if they don't undergo reconstructive surgery, they may feel like their own sexuality has been diminished, or they may have a partner who is grieving because of the loss of that as a part of their erotic script. Or prostatectomies and no longer being able to get an erection. All of these different things that can happen over the course of a lifetime. To understand that uh, uh, sex isn't just about penetrative sex, but that's sex. There's intercourse, and then there's outer course, and that all of that is an important uh, consideration of what is my sexual script at this point in my life.
Hmm. Well, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Any other final thoughts before we start to wrap it up?
I would just encourage people the clinicians who are in the field of sex and sexuality, or even when they're talking about sex within the context of their work, is to be thinking about how temperament is a factor in these sexual problems, and particularly that over-controlled temperament, and realize that there are resources available to those clients. Right now, my book is the first and only book that applies the concept of the over-controlled temperament to for the lay audience. And I specifically, obviously, wrote it about my work as a sex therapist. But there are resources certainly available to people, and I hope they would check it out.
Yeah, that's great. And anything else you want to mention? Obviously, everyone should go get the book, Making Nice with Naughty, and particularly for those who are either fall into the category of or are working with people who are perfectionistic, practical, color within the lines. Um, and do you have a website or anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, so people can certainly, we have a podcast called the Making Nice with Naughty podcast.
Oh, great.
Uh, and they can visit me at makingnicewithnaughty.com, or also on my clinic website is apathtowellness.com.
Good. Well, thank you so much again, Tom. I really appreciate having you on. Hopefully, we can catch up again at some point in the future.
I would love that. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you so much, everybody, for watching the show. I'm Shane Birkel, and this is the Couples Therapist Couch podcast, a podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. If you enjoyed the show, please hit subscribe. Please hit the like button. And you can continue to get all of the most up-to-date information in the world of couples therapy. If you are a therapist who's interested in learning more about the practice of therapy, or if you're someone who just wants to learn more about how to have a good relationship, definitely hit subscribe so you can get all of the latest episodes. Thank you so much. Also, if you're interested in the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, you can click on the link in the show notes. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Shane Birkel. This is the Couples Therapist Couch.